Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Thank you very much, Dr. Rico, for your kind introduction. I'd like to thank the organizing committee for inviting me to this International Congress of Vegetarian Nutrition. It's always a great pleasure to come to Loma Linda. Now, Dr. Zapate has given me a difficult task of talking about the past, which covers several millennia, and about the present, which is actually what we are vividly experiencing here at this Congress, and little is known about the future, so one can probably speculate. Now, before I start my talk about vegetarian nutrition, I'd like to show you a little bit of my home city of Gießen that was just mentioned now. The city of Gießen is about 50 miles north of Frankfurt in Germany. It has a population of close to 80,000 people, and with 30,002 students, it is the university city in Germany that has the highest student density. Most of the city was destroyed during the Second World War, and some of the old buildings were rebuilt again, like this former house of armament, which now is the Institute of Agriculture, or part of the new castle, which is now the Institute of Geography. And this famous chemist gave his name to our university, which was founded over 400 years ago. Justus von Liebig was a professor at the age of 21 years. If he would have lived long enough, he probably would have received the Nobel Prize. But that's what you get for not being a vegetarian. There's a famous Liebig Museum in Gießen, where his original laboratories and his library and the lecture hall are still in the original state. And if you ever come to Germany, then I invite you to come to Gießen. I give you a personal tour, promise. This is the Institute of Nutrition, where our home is. It was the first Institute of Human Nutrition in Western Germany. It was established in 1956. And as a historical note, this old villa served as the military headquarters of the US Armed Forces after the war from 1945 to 1955. So also history. Now, this is the outline of my talk. I give a short introduction, and then you can see the past is dim, the present is clear, the future is bright, and I hope at the closing we all will be a little bit enlightened. And you see, I have it with the light. And the connection is that many English-speaking people have difficulties pronouncing my name. And then I tell them, why don't you use the plural of light, lights. And then you have Leitzmann. Yes. So that's easy to remember. And my first name is even easier to remember because my second name is Santa. And what we learned the other day about Santa is, first, we believe in it. Then comes a time where we don't believe in it. And then we play it. And at the end, we look like him. I'm getting close to it. Now, the introduction is glowing, as you see here. And I'll show you just two slides. The first one is this. It's always good to start with Adam and Eve. And you see this completely vegetarian, but you see the skeptical young man there. He's not quite sure whether he should eat or whether he should not eat. Now, nobody knows for sure whether it really was an apple. Maybe it was another fruit, and in some other cultures they believe it was another fruit. But what we know for sure is that it wasn't like this. So now I'm coming to the past, and the past is a long time, so I'll make a rather short and quick run through the history of vegetarian nutrition. The ancient cultures used a predominantly plant-based diet. And you can look at all the old cultures that we know, whether it's in Egypt, in China, in India, in Peru, or in Mexico. The main staples were plant foods. They were not all vegetarians, but plants played always a major role. The first written report about vegetarian nutrition was in antiquity, and it is documented. These were the first vegetarians in Europe. It was the mythical figure of Orpheus. His followers were vegetarians. Orpheus was an exceptionally gifted singer, and he enchanted not only people, but, as they say, also plants and animals. And then come a whole row of famous people in history that all had to do with vegetarian nutrition. Now this Pythagoras is maybe the most famous one. He is the founder of ethical vegetarianism, and he drank only water. Now the number of people that were also vegetarians at that time is not known for sure, but the number was probably small. And this is true for all the other people that I'm going to show next. They had followers, but most of the people were not vegetarians in the sense as we know it today, but many didn't eat meat in the first line because of financial reasons. So here is Platon, who said that town people should live vegetarian because meat eaters need a doctor. And apparently it was, he described it in his book, that the people that lived in the country were the meat eaters, and the town people didn't eat meat. Ovid from Italy wrote also a famous book, and he had in his book strong arguments against eating meat. Next one is Plutarch. He's again from Greece, and he preached love of animals and love of nature, and he was a vegetarian. Now, it is interesting to look at the reasons to be a vegetarian in antiquity. And if you go through this list, animals are related to man. Animals can communicate and think. Man is legally responsible for animals. Killing animals means injustice and harm. Animal protection trains in humanitarianism. And other factors like reincarnation or these here. And this set is mainly concerned with health. Eating meat is harmful to health. Eating meat influences the mind. Plant foods cleanses the soul. Vegetarianism leads to an alignment with the gods. There is enough to eat without meat. And to me it's interesting, if you look at all of these reasons, they haven't changed much in the last 2,500 years. We have still the same reasons for being vegetarians. If you look at the major religions and vegetarianism, also here the idea of not killing animals is expressed in almost all of these religions that are listed here, in Hinduism, in Buddhism, in Judaism, and Christianity, of course, has the fifth commandment, thou shalt not kill, which includes also animals. This now is the Middle Ages. Thomas of Aquin, who represents the time of these dark ages. And he said, animals have no intellect, they can be used alive or dead. So that was quite different from the beliefs in antiquity. And then come some of these famous people like Leonardo da Vinci, this universal genius. He was a committed vegetarian, and most of you know this quote, "The time will come when we will condemn the eating of animals just as today we condemn the eating of our own kind, the consuming of humans. Here are some vegetarians in the age of enlightenment. Voltaire, well known, he was a proponent of the vegetarian lifestyle, and Rousseau praised the virtues of Pythagoras' lifestyle. And it's interesting that the teachings of Pythagoras were still kept alive until the 19th century. Then the vegetarianism in the 19th century in Europe, there were many people that were vegetarians. Here are some of the important ones, like the poet Shelley. And I find this interesting that he already said at that time that meat production is a waste of resources, an idea that has become popular in new times only in the last 10 or 20 years. And Gustav von Struve, a lawyer, went as far as to say plant food is the basis of a new world view. Here we have the vegetarianism in the US. Two of the most prominent representatives are Sylvester Graham, the priest, who was a vegetarian, and he also believed that we should eat plenty of raw food. I will come back to this point a little bit later on. And of the most famous man probably is John Harvey Kellogg, who had the sanatorium in Battle Creek in Michigan. He was a vegetarian himself and was able to heal many people of various diseases by vegetarian food and a very Spartan lifestyle. And he's the inventor of many things, the best known probably cornflakes, peanut butters, and some others. Then we have the vegetarianism in the 19th and 20th century, and these people are probably best remembered for these quotes that are listed here, like Shaw was saying, "Animals are my friends, and I don't eat my friends." And Albert Einstein's quote is also well known, "Nothing will increase the chances of survival for life on Earth as much as the evolution of a vegetarian diet." And then we have some people that are also important in the history of vegetarian nutrition. Maximilian Oskar Becher-Benner, he was the inventor of muesli. And if you see muesli preparations today, they are quite different from the original, because all he put into the muesli were apples, nuts, a bit of lemon juice, and some cream. That was the original muesli, and you hardly find it anymore today. And his credo was, plant food contains surprising sun powers. And what he really meant, and probably saw already, that we didn't know all the constituents of plant food, which we today call phytochemicals. And then I like to mention Werner Kohlert, a famous German physician who was a proponent of plant-based whole food. And he became famous for saying, our food should be processed as little as possible. Leave food as natural as possible. And I think that's still a good advice today. Then I have to tell you a little bit about the organized vegetarianism. It started with a vegetarian club in Manchester in England. Then in 1847 there was the first vegetarian society that today is called Vegetarian Society of the United Kingdom. And they introduced the term vegetarian, because before they always talked about the Pythagorean diet. In the United States, the American Vegetarian Society was founded in 1850. In Germany, it was in 1867. And the first vegan society was started also in England in 1944. This was the past as far as I want to go, and there's much more detail outside there, as was just mentioned by Dr. Rico, so if you want to read a little bit more about it, you can see it there. This was not part of my title, The Twilight Zone. I called it this way because if you go from the past to the present, then there is a time in between, and this I would like to talk about just a little bit. Now I want to come back to these approaches, in which way vegetarian nutrition has changed over the last 50 or 60 years. Now in the 50s, nobody really talked about vegetarian nutrition. So we had this situation here that you had a risk of deficiency if you didn't get enough nutrients. Most of the nutrition was optimal, but there was also a risk of an excess, at least a beginning of it. And this went on then in the 1960s, when vegetarian nutrition appeared in Western societies. And here the situation is such that the risk eating a vegetarian diet was considered huge in comparison to the meat-based diet. There was only very little risk. And on the other hand, the risk of excess was beginning in the meat-based diet. So obesity was starting at this time, and nobody could ever believe that a vegetarian would become obese. But this was in 1960s. Then we have the 1990s, and here the picture changed again, where there still was the opinion a vegetarian diet has a great risk. Meat eating had a small risk, but here you see that there was the beginning of vegetarians becoming obese, and the meat-based risk increased tremendously, as we see it still today. And then comes the new approach, and these are all, this is the idea of John Sabate, and he has published it in books and several other publications. And here you see that the new situation, as we have it today, is that the risk of meat eating has become greater, and the risk of excess is still the same, and the vegetarian diet has risk of deficiency and very little risk of excess. So this is actually the new situation, and these four pictures actually are a summary of the transition that has taken place during the last 50, 60 years. But I would like to make a few other points in connection with the situation Twilight Zone, and want to point out that it was no secret that plant foods were good to prevent certain diseases. And here you see an advertisement, cancer, reduce your risk. And if you look at it very briefly, you would think this may be an advertisement of the California fruit industry. But if you look closely at it, you see it's the American Cancer Society, which had a picture of this kind in the National Geographic in 1983. So a long time ago. And if you go through these food items here, you will see they are only plant foods. There's no animal food listed. And this went on in other countries. We had it in Germany a little bit later, in 1994, to eat against cancer, that is reduce the risk of becoming cancer. And also there was a Time magazine article saying, should you be a vegetarian? And interestingly enough, they pointed out that millions of Europeans are going meatless. Is that a healthy thing to do? Implying as if in the States this was not happening. But I know at the same time this happened in the United States. At that time many people were thinking of becoming vegetarians, and as a matter of fact they became vegetarians. Many of you know this report of the World Cancer Research Fund and the American Institute of Cancer Research. This information was published in 2007, and let me just point out that this was one of the most detailed investigations or meta-analyses that was ever made. I was part of the team to work on this report. We looked at 500,000 different publications that were connected with these items of food, nutrition, physical activity, and the prevention of cancer. But finally, only the ones that fulfilled certain criteria were taken into this report. And if you look at the details, you see that there's good scientific evidence that the risk of becoming cancer, of getting cancer, can be reduced substantially. And here's just one of these tables. You see that all the blue fields here say probably reduce cancer risk. And if you look at the food items that do this, and you see it's foods containing dietary fiber, non-starchy vegetables, onion, vegetables, garlic, fruits, foods containing folate or foods containing lycopene. So again, the evidence that plant food can reduce the risk of having cancer is given. So from the past then we come to the present, and here is a nice saying: the past is history, the future is a mystery, but today is a gift. And that's why it's called the present. So you have a gift. So we come to the present, and the present is clear, and the clearest information on the nutrition situation of the vegetarian nutrition today is Loma Linda and the 6th International Congress of Vegetarian Nutrition and vegetarianism itself, because here all the topics that are discussed and all the lectures that we hear are evidence for the fact that vegetarian nutrition is part of our society now, and that we can address many different aspects that then will look at the value of vegetarian nutrition. And I've listed just all the research categories that are part of this international congress here. And when one talks about the present, one could now list all the things that are being done today, but this is not, of course, not part of my presentation. There are many lectures that give the details of these different research categories. I just wanted to make a few points to the present, and this is one that has that I'm thinking about quite a bit, because the reasons for people being a vegetarian are often the determinants of their nutritional status. Because it's my observation, and our research shows it, that if you have people that have intellectual reasons to be vegetarians, ethical reasons, moral reasons, religious or spiritual reasons, these people in many cases just stop eating meat and continue to eat as they did before. And that's not good enough. You have to change your whole eating pattern if you want to have a healthy nutrition. And here, in this group of people, you find usually the problems that we are discussing in terms of deficient in vitamin B12 or deficient in iron, calcium, protein, and other things. Now, on the other hand, if people become vegetarians either mainly for physical reasons like health, hygiene, toxicology, or for performance reasons, they think about the food and they think about their health. They don't think only about the fate of the animals, so they will try to learn how to do vegetarian nutrition in a way that all nutrients are supplied if possible, in an optimal amount. You have probably the same experience that vegetarians and especially vegans need nutrition education, because the belief is that if people go vegetarian, they certainly would know how to do it right, but in many cases they don't. I probably don't have to tell you about a well-balanced vegetarian diet, but I have just put all the important food groups that vegetarians should eat: cereals, legumes, potatoes, vegetables, fruits of all colors, and wanted to point out, if you process these foods, as an example here, grain, then you can lose a lot of the nutrients in this processing. And here listed is a comparison of whole meal flour compared to white flour. The reduction, that is the losses that occur if you produce white flour, are immense. They go from about 60% to almost 90%. Magnesium, selenium, and these are lost to the largest extent. So it's a big mistake to process food to a large degree. And this is what Collard told us, as I just have shown, that we should leave foods as natural as possible. And then we go on with the other food groups, nuts, seeds, herbs, mushrooms, and so forth, and also the raw food that was proposed also by Graham. And again, here, if you look at the raw food, the value of raw food, I just want to point out the important advantages of them. There's no destruction of nutrients. It requires intensive chewing. It stimulates salivation. It cleans our teeth. It increases satiety, supports digestion, prevents overeating, and normalizes the transit time. So many advantages of eating raw food. As you know, there are people that eat exclusively raw food. I'm not suggesting that. Our recommendation is to eat about half of the food that you eat per day in raw form, and the other half can be cooked or heated in other ways. That's probably acceptable for most people. I probably don't have to read this position of the ADA, but I always have the question about these two terms here. What does it mean appropriately planned and well planned? And is that the same? Is appropriately planned the same as well planned? And does it mean supplements or not? I think we have to clearly communicate this, what it means when we talk about well planned or appropriately planned diets. It certainly shouldn't be like this. Supplements should be used, but should be whole food, just to make that point once more. Now, another comparison that is interesting is, and yesterday I think it was Bonnie who was talking about it, the potentially critical nutrients on the one hand for meat eaters. And if you look at these different nutrients, see there are a lot of iron, iodine, zinc, calcium, vitamin D, folic acid, and the fish oil acids. You see not only the vegetarians have potentially critical nutrients, but also the meat eaters. And then if you look at the potential critical nutrients for vegetarians or vegans, it is interesting to find that they're almost the same, except for vitamin B12 for the vegans, possibly calcium, but it depends on the composition of the food. So there's no big difference between these potentially critical nutrients between vegetarians and meat eaters. And another thing I wanted to point out is our uncertainty about the recommendations. We still are not too sure how much of these nutrients we need. I have two examples here. One is vitamin B12. Now in Germany, they recommend 3 micrograms per day. In the US, it is 2.4, the same as the FAO and WHO. In the United Kingdom, it's only about half. And many of you probably still know Victor Herbert. He was the specialist on vitamin B12, and he told also on congresses and published about it, that maybe 0.5 micrograms are sufficient. And what this means is that many of the statistics that we read today, when they say 30 or 40 or 50% of the vegans or vegetarians are deficient in vitamin B12, the question has to be asked, are these recommendations are really valid? Or should they be lowered? And the same is true, as you just saw already, for calcium intake. There's a twofold difference. And Vegans, as we know, usually take in about 500 to 600 milligrams of calcium per day, and they're all declared to be deficient. But if they don't eat animal protein, this amount is probably sufficient, if not optimal. So I think this has to be clarified by further research. Now, the risks for chronic diseases compared to meat eaters, vegetarians are less overweight, have lower diabetes, show lower blood pressure and less hypertension, suffer less heart diseases, and have a lower cancer risk. All this has been discussed already yesterday, and it will probably be the topic of more lectures today and tomorrow, so I'm not going to go into details, but anybody that's talking about vegetarian nutrition today has to mention the Adventist studies here in the United States, in Loma Linda. And I have brought some of these data that were shown yesterday, and I think more than once, that if you look at the BMI, the vegans are much better off than the meat eaters. There's a difference of a BMI of 5 points. And the conclusion of the authors of these publications was the 5-unit BMI difference between vegans and non-vegetarians indicates a substantial potential of vegetarians to protect against obesity. And one more information, this was also shown yesterday, diabetes type 2. The vegans are much better off than the meat eaters, and the others are in between. But it also shows that the vegans do have diabetes. And I think there is much room for improvement if they really use the plant foods in an optimal composition and also preparation. I wanted to shortly to point out the estimated number of vegetarians in different countries. It's very difficult to get solid or hard numbers on this, but India is first place. About 35% of the Indian population is vegetarian. That means 450 million people. And these 450 million people means that there are far more vegetarians in India than in the rest of the world. So, India is number one. And if I show you the other countries, you see the percentage is much lower, and because the population is not as high, the numbers of the millions of people are much lower. Now, many of these data are, as I mentioned, not very hard, but they give a good orientation. Many other countries are not as far in the vegetarian nutrition, and some continents like Africa, Eastern Europe, and South America, mostly the number of vegetarians is below 1%. So worldwide, there are not as many vegetarians as we wish there would be. Pyramids have been built since 2,500 years before Christ, and these are still being built, like the Loma Linda University Vegetarian Food Pyramid. They also published one on the vegan food pyramid. I took this out of the internet. It's not very clear, but many of you know this food pyramid anyway. I think last count there were about 150 different food pyramids in the internet. And of course we published also our vegetarian and vegan food pyramid, and it is a pyramid where both vegetarians and vegans are considered. So all the vegans have to do is leave off these top 3 items here. And the details, of course, have been published and can be read. Now, we come from the present. The present is a gift. It is a challenge. It's an opportunity, but it's also a responsibility, our responsibility for the future. And the future, as I mentioned before, is bright. We have to look beyond the horizon to see into the future. There is some speculation about it. The point that I want to make is that the future for vegetarian nutrition, in my view, is bright, because for ethical, moral, religious, and spiritual reasons, people no longer want animals to suffer and to be killed and live a miserable life just to please their own taste buds. Who needs this? This is 60% of daily energy requirement. You really don't need that. Now, the future of vegetarian nutrition is bright also for ecological, economical, and political reasons, because people neither want the destruction of the basis of their lives nor a climate change. The earth is on fire. Even the king penguins are discussing this. And what is an ice bear without ice and snow? So there's a real problem. And the future of vegetarian nutrition is bright for reasons of health, hygiene, and performance. People no longer want to suffer from preventable nutrition-related diseases. They want to be healthy, and the possibility is given. And obesity is a real epidemic of the 21st century, as most of us well know, and especially also for children. And the future of vegetarian nutrition is bright for reasons of sustainability and peace, because people want a stable quality of life for themselves, for their children, and for generations to come. By the way, that's our granddaughter here. And the future has many names. As Einstein said, for the weak it is the unattainable, for the scared it is the unknown, and for the brave, it is the opportunity, and an opportunity. Opportunity, in my view, in my estimation, we are the consumers, or as they were saying in former East Germany, we are the people. We are the people, we are the consumers. We have to build the future, and together we are strong. And the consumer is king. Only food that is bought will be produced. So if the food is being bought, it will not be produced any longer. And each food purchase that we made is a ballot for one kind or for another kind of a diet. And the trickle-up effect does work in politics. We have seen that for cigarette smoking, especially in this country here. And in my opinion, we need more independent nutrition education for everybody without the influence of the economics. So the closing remarks, I hope, are somewhat enlightened us. This is one important quote of the last century. Our biggest problem is the transformation of plant food into animal products. I will not exclude the possibility that by the end of the 21st century, all of mankind will live vegetarian. Now that's not unusual, but it's unusual. Who said this? It was the chief executive officer of Nestle, which I think is quite surprising that people discuss it in these terms. So all we need now is plant-based whole food, and all of you know how this plant-based whole food looks like. And the lesson for today comes from Collard again. He said, much is known, unfortunately, in different heads. Thank you very much for your attention.